Olivia Martinez never imagined that the most painful moment of her life would become someone else's weapon. The photos she had kept private, sacred even, documenting a loss so profound it nearly broke her, were now being paraded across social media by her ex-husband's new wife, claiming them as her own tragedy. But this wasn't just about stolen photos. This was about a web of lies so intricate, so calculated, that when Olivia finally decided to fight back, she discovered something far more sinister than she ever could have imagined.
Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. At 26, Olivia Martinez had rebuilt her life from the ground up. 3 years had passed since her divorce from Jake Thompson, and she had finally found her footing again. Her small apartment in downtown Portland, Oregon, overlooked the Willamette River, and every morning she watched the sunrise paint the water gold while sipping her coffee. It wasn't the suburban dream she'd once shared with Jake, but it was hers. Olivia worked as a graphic designer for a local nonprofit called Hope Harbor, which supported families experiencing pregnancy and infant loss. The irony wasn't lost on her. She had found her calling in helping others navigate the same devastating waters she'd once nearly drowned in. Her colleagues knew bits and pieces of her story, but Olivia had always been selective about what she shared. Some wounds were too personal, too sacred to become office conversation. Her small circle of friends consisted mainly of college roommates who had stuck by her through everything. Maya Chen, a pediatric nurse who had held Olivia's hand through the darkest days, and Rebecca Sullivan, a high school English teacher whose sharp wit and fierce loyalty had been Olivia's anchor when the world felt like it was spinning out of control. They met every Thursday at Brewster's Cafe, a routine that had become Olivia's touchstone of normalcy. The life Olivia had once envisioned felt like it belonged to someone else entirely. She and Jake had married young. She was 21, he was 24, full of plans and promises that seemed unbreakable at the time. They'd bought a small house in Beaverton with a spare bedroom that Jake had immediately dubbed the nursery, even though they had agreed to wait a few years before starting a family. But life, as Olivia learned, rarely followed the timeline you set for it. When she got pregnant unexpectedly during their second year of marriage, the initial shock had given way to cautious excitement. Jake had transformed the nursery with the dedication of someone building a shrine, painting the walls a soft sage green and assembling a crib that had taken him 3 weekends and considerable cursing to complete. Olivia had documented everything, with the enthusiasm of a first-time mother-to-be. Photos of her growing belly, the ultrasound images they'd gotten at each appointment, Jake's attempts at putting together baby furniture, and the small collection of gifts that had already started arriving from excited family members. She'd started a pregnancy journal, writing letters to their unborn daughter Emma about the world she would soon enter. The miscarriage happened during Olivia's 15th week of pregnancy, just after they'd started telling extended family and friends about the baby. What should have been a routine appointment turned into a nightmare when the doctor couldn't find Emma's heartbeat. The silence in that sterile room had been deafening, the absence of sound where there should have been the rapid flutter of new life. The medical term was missed miscarriage, meaning Emma had stopped developing weeks earlier, but Olivia's body hadn't recognized the loss. She'd been carrying her daughter, unaware that she was already gone. The knowledge that she'd been talking to Emma, singing to her, planning for her, while she was no longer there, haunted Olivia in ways she struggled to articulate. The physical process had been traumatic enough, the medical procedures, the hospital stays, the gradual return to a body that no longer felt like her own. But the emotional devastation was something else entirely. Olivia felt like she was drowning in a grief so profound it had its own gravitational pull, threatening to drag her under every time she thought she'd found solid ground. Jake had handled the loss differently. Where Olivia needed to talk, to process, to sit with the pain, Jake wanted to move forward, to get back to normal as quickly as possible. He'd packed away the nursery items within a week, storing them in the garage for later, though they both knew there might not be a later. He'd stopped mentioning Emma entirely, as if speaking her name would summon the grief back from wherever he had managed to bury it.
The months following the miscarriage revealed cracks in their marriage that had perhaps always been there, but had been hidden beneath the excitement of building a life together. Olivia needed support, understanding, and space to grieve. Jake needed normalcy, forward momentum, and what he called positive energy. Neither could give the other what they needed. Olivia had attended a support group for pregnancy and infant loss, finding comfort in the stories of other women who understood her pain without needing lengthy explanations. She'd kept a private photo album on her phone, pictures from the pregnancy, the ultrasound images, photos of the nursery Jake had created with such care. They were painful to look at, but they were also proof that Emma had existed, that their dreams had been real, even if they'd been brief. Jake had found these photos disturbing, a barrier to healing rather than part of the process. He'd asked Olivia multiple times to delete them, to let go and move on. Each time, Olivia had refused. Those photos were all she had left of the daughter she'd never gotten to hold, and she couldn't bring herself to erase that evidence of love. The divorce had been surprisingly amicable, at least on the surface. They'd sold the house, split their modest assets, and agreed to go their separate ways. Jake had wanted a clean break. No shared friends, no regular contact, no reminders of what they'd built and lost together. Olivia had been too exhausted to fight him on it. She'd moved to Portland, started over, and slowly began the process of rebuilding herself from the ground up. By the time Olivia turned 26, she had created a life that felt authentically hers. Her work at Hope Harbor gave her purpose, connecting her own experience to something larger than herself. She'd helped design memorial cards for families who had lost babies, created informational brochures about grief and healing, and contributed to the organization's social media presence, sharing resources and support for people navigating similar losses. Her apartment was filled with plants, something she'd discovered she had a talent for after killing her first succulent and refusing to give up. Maya joked that Olivia had created her own personal jungle, but there was something healing about nurturing living things, watching them grow and thrive under her care. She'd even started dating again, though nothing serious had developed. She wasn't sure she was ready for serious, and that was okay. The photos from her pregnancy with Emma remained on her phone, stored in a private album she accessed rarely but treasured deeply. She'd never posted them anywhere public, never shared them beyond Maya and Rebecca, who had been with her through everything. They were sacred, private monuments to a love that was real, even though it had been brief. Olivia had heard through mutual acquaintances that Jake had remarried about a year after their divorce. His new wife was named Melissa Parker, a dental hygienist from Lake Oswego who was reportedly everything Olivia was not: bubbly, optimistic, and, according to sources, eager to start a family immediately. Olivia had felt a brief sting of jealousy, not because she wanted Jake back, but because he had apparently found it so easy to move on, to begin again, to plan for the future she had once thought they'd share. She'd deliberately avoided looking up Melissa on social media, knowing that nothing good could come from comparing her new life to someone else's highlight reel. Maya had done some reconnaissance early on, more out of protective curiosity than malice, and reported that Melissa seemed aggressively cheerful, with an Instagram account full of selfies, inspirational quotes, and elaborate brunch photos. Olivia had no contact with Jake beyond the occasional text about paperwork or legal matters. Their divorce had been finalized cleanly, with no shared property or ongoing obligations to tie them together. She preferred it that way. The past was the past, and she'd worked too hard building her new life to let old wounds reopen unnecessarily. What Olivia had built in Portland wasn't the life she had originally planned, but it was good. She had meaningful work, genuine friendships, and a sense of purpose that had grown from her own experience with loss. She'd learned to carry Emma's memory with her without letting it define her entire existence. The grief would always be there, but it had transformed from something sharp and cutting into something softer, more integrated into who she was becoming. Her apartment reflected this growth. The walls were covered with her own artwork, designs she'd created for Hope Harbor, photographs she'd taken around the city, sketches of the plants that had taken over every available surface. It was a space that felt Intentionally created, thoughtfully curated, entirely her own. She'd even started talking about maybe getting a dog, something Maya had been encouraging for months. The idea of having a living being depend on her felt both exciting and terrifying, but in a good way, the kind of fear that comes with growth rather than trauma. This was Olivia's world as summer approached, stable, healing, and finally pointing towards a future she could imagine without Jake, without the dreams they'd shared, without the constant weight of what might have been. She was 26 years old, living in a city she loved, doing work that mattered, surrounded by people who cared about her. She had no idea that her ex-husband's new wife had been watching her, studying her, and planning something that would shatter the careful peace Olivia had spent 3 years building.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story.
It was a Tuesday morning in early June when Olivia's carefully constructed piece began to crumble. She was at her desk at Hope Harbor, working on a new brochure design about supporting partners through pregnancy loss, when her phone buzzed with a notification she hadn't expected to see in years. A Facebook message from someone named Jennifer Walsh, a name that took Olivia a moment to place. Jennifer had been Jake's cousin, someone Olivia had met only a handful of times during family gatherings. They'd never been close, barely exchanging more than pleasantries at holiday dinners, which made the message all the more jarring. "Hi, Olivia. I hope you're doing well. I wasn't sure if I should reach out, but I thought you should know about something. Can you call me when you get a chance? It's about Jake and his new wife. I think there's something you need to see." Olivia stared at the message for several minutes, her coffee growing cold as she tried to imagine what could possibly warrant Jennifer breaking years of silence. Her first instinct was to delete the message and pretend she'd never seen it. She'd worked so hard to separate herself from Jake's world, to build something entirely her own. Whatever drama was unfolding in his new marriage wasn't her concern. But something about Jennifer's tone, careful, almost apologetic, suggested this wasn't gossip or petty family drama. Jennifer had always struck Olivia as sensible, not the type to stir up trouble for entertainment. Against her better judgment, Olivia found herself dialing Jennifer's number during her lunch break. Jennifer answered on the second ring, her voice tight with an emotion Olivia couldn't immediately identify. "Olivia, thank you for calling. I've been wrestling with whether to contact you for weeks." "What's going on, Jennifer? Your message was pretty cryptic." There was a pause, the sound of Jennifer taking a deep breath. "It's about Melissa, Jake's wife. She's been posting things on social media, photos and stories about losing a baby. But Olivia, some of those photos, they look exactly like ones you posted years ago. I remember them from when you and Jake were going through everything." Olivia felt the world tilt slightly, as if someone had shifted the foundation beneath her feet. "What do you mean they look like mine? What kind of photos?" "Hospital bracelets, medical paperwork, even what looks like ultrasound images. She's been posting them over the past few months, talking about her miscarriage and how devastated she and Jake are. But Olivia, I was at Jake's birthday party last month, and when I mentioned how sorry I was about their loss, both of them looked completely confused. Jake actually laughed and said they weren't ready for kids yet." The phone felt heavy in Olivia's hand. "That doesn't make sense. Maybe they just don't want to talk about it publicly, but share it online?" "That's what I thought too, until I saw the photos more closely. One of the hospital bracelets clearly shows a Portland hospital name, not anything here in Lake Oswego where they live. And another thing, the dates don't match up. She's been posting about this supposed miscarriage happening 3 months ago, but the timestamps on some of the photos she shared go back years." Olivia's breath caught. Her photos from Emma's loss had been taken at Oregon Health and Science University Hospital in Portland, where she'd gone for the procedures. The bracelet, the paperwork, the sterile hospital rooms, all of it was seared into her memory with painful clarity. After ending the call with Jennifer, Olivia sat in her car in the Hope Harbor parking lot, staring at her phone screen.
She hadn't looked at Jake's social media in over 2 years, had deliberately blocked him and avoided any digital spaces where she might accidentally encounter reminders of their shared past. Now, she found herself creating a fake account, her hands shaking slightly, as she searched for Melissa Parker Thompson. Melissa's Instagram account was public, filled with the lifestyle content Maya had described years earlier: smoothie bowls, workout selfies, motivational quotes in cursive fonts. But scattered among the typical posts were others, darker ones, that made Olivia's stomach lurch with recognition. There was the hospital bracelet, white plastic with black text, photographed against rumpled bedsheets. The exact same angle, the same lighting, even the same small tear in the corner that Olivia remembered from her own desperate documentation of those awful days. Below it, Melissa's caption read, "Some days the grief hits you like a wave. 3 months later, and I still can't believe we lost our sweet angel. Jake has been my rock through all of this. Hashtag miscarriage. Grief. Angel's baby. Hashtag marriage strong." Olivia scrolled further, her heart pounding as she recognized image after image from her own private album. The ultrasound photo that had shown Emma's tiny form at 12 weeks, now posted by Melissa with the caption, "Our baby at 10 weeks. I'll treasure this image forever." The sterile hospital corridor she had photographed during one of her darkest moments, now shared by Melissa as, "Walking these halls was the hardest thing I've ever done." Most disturbing was a photo Olivia had taken of her own hands holding the tiny hospital gown they'd given her for Emma, so small it could have fit a doll. Melissa had posted it with, "They gave us this little gown for our baby. I can't bring myself to put it away. Some losses change you forever." Each photo felt like a violation, but it was more than just theft of images. Melissa had stolen the most intimate, devastating moments of Olivia's life and repurposed them as her own narrative. The captions were crafted perfectly, not too dramatic, not too raw, just authentic sounding enough to garner sympathy and support from her followers. The comments under each post were filled with heart emojis, condolences, and offers of support. Friends of Melissa's shared their own stories of loss, creating a community of grief around a lie. Jake's family members had commented with prayers and love, apparently completely believing the fiction his wife had constructed. But it was Jake's own comments that cut deepest. Under the photo of the hospital bracelet, he'd written, "You're so strong, babe. We'll get through this together. I love you so much." Under the ultrasound image, "Our sweet baby, I love you both." Olivia found herself shaking as she read his words. These were the same sentiments he'd never been able to express to her during their actual loss. The support, the public acknowledgement of grief, the willingness to engage with the pain rather than bury it, all of it was being performed for a fabricated tragedy, while their real loss had been met with silence and avoidance. Olivia spent the rest of her lunch break in a daze, scrolling through months of Melissa's posts with growing horror and fascination. The stolen photos weren't random. They'd been carefully selected and curated to tell a specific story. Melissa had even created a timeline that roughly matched what Olivia's actual experience had been, posting progression photos that documented a fictional pregnancy and loss. Some of the images had been edited. In one photo of medical paperwork that Olivia recognized as her discharge instructions from the hospital, Melissa had clearly photoshopped out Olivia's name and replaced it with her own. The dates had been changed too, moved forward by nearly 3 years to match Melissa's timeline. The most chilling discovery was a screenshot of what appeared to be a text conversation between Melissa and Jake discussing their loss, but Olivia recognized the background and formatting. It was from her own phone, screenshots she'd taken of conversations with her doctor's office about scheduling follow-up appointments. Melissa had somehow obtained these private images and edited them to appear as if they were personal messages between her and Jake. What pushed Olivia's disbelief into genuine alarm was discovering that Melissa had used the stolen photos not just for personal sympathy, but for professional gain. Her Instagram bio included a link to a blog where she'd written extensively about pregnancy loss, positioning herself as an advocate and resource for other grieving families. The blog was monetized with affiliate links to grief counseling services, memorial jewelry, and support books. Melissa had created an entire platform around experiences that weren't her own, profiting from tragedies she'd never endured, using documentation of pain she'd never felt. One blog post in particular made Olivia feel physically ill. Titled, "When the Nursery Dreams Die, A Mother's Journey Through Loss," it described in vivid detail the experience of losing a baby, but every detail was lifted directly from Olivia's own experience. The sage green paint Jake had chosen for Emma's room, the crib that had taken him 3 weekends to assemble, even the specific model of rocking chair they'd picked out together. Melissa had somehow obtained not just Olivia's photos, but intimate details about their marriage, their hopes, their specific experiences of loss. The blog post even included quotes that Olivia recognized as things she'd said to Jake during their darkest moments, now presented as Melissa's own words. As Olivia dug deeper, she began to understand the scope of what Melissa had constructed. It wasn't just a few stolen photos posted for sympathy. It was an entire fabricated identity built around a tragedy that never happened to her. Melissa had created social media accounts dedicated to pregnancy loss advocacy, joined online support groups where she shared her story, and even started a small non-profit organization that collected donations for families experiencing infant loss. The nonprofit was registered under Melissa's name and listed Jake as the treasurer. They'd been collecting money from well-meaning donors who believed they were supporting an organization founded by parents who had experienced loss themselves. The irony was bitter. Olivia's real tragedy had been monetized and corporatized by someone who had never experienced anything remotely similar. But perhaps most disturbing was the discovery that Melissa seemed to have access to photos Olivia had never posted anywhere public. Images from her private album, screenshots from her phone, even pictures she'd only shared with Maya and Rebecca. How had Melissa obtained these intimately personal documents? Sitting in her car as her lunch break stretched long past its official end, Olivia found herself facing a question she'd never expected to confront. What do you do when someone steals not just your photos, but your entire experience of grief? The violation felt deeper than simple theft. Melissa hadn't just taken images. She'd appropriated Olivia's most sacred pain and turned it into performance art. She'd taken the love Olivia had felt for Emma, the dreams she'd held, the specific details of their loss, and repackaged them as her own story for public consumption and financial gain. But it was Jake's participation that felt like the cruelest twist. The man who had been unable to support Olivia through their actual loss was now publicly performing grief for a fictional one. He was giving his new wife the emotional presence and acknowledgement he'd never been able to give Olivia when she'd needed it most. The afternoon sun was beating down on her car windows, and Olivia realized she'd been sitting there for over an hour scrolling through the elaborate fiction Melissa had constructed from the ruins of her marriage. Her co-workers were probably wondering where she was, but she couldn't bring herself to go back inside and pretend to focus on designing brochures about supporting families through loss when her own loss had been weaponized by a stranger. For the first time in 3 years, Olivia felt the old familiar rage building in her chest. Not the soft grief she'd learned to carry, but the sharp, burning anger she'd thought she'd processed years ago. Someone had invaded the most private corners of her pain and turned it into performance art. She'd taken the love Olivia had felt for Emma, the dreams she'd held, the specific details of their loss, and repackaged them as her own story for public consumption and financial gain.
Olivia's hands were still trembling when she called Maya from her car. She didn't even wait for a proper greeting before the words tumbled out. "I need you and Rebecca to meet me tonight. Something's happened with Jake, and I need your help figuring out what to do about it." Maya's nursing shift didn't end until 7, so they arranged to meet at Olivia's apartment at 8. Olivia spent the drive home in a fog, her mind cycling between disbelief and fury. By the time she reached her building, she'd made a decision that surprised her with its clarity. She wasn't going to let this slide. Whatever it took, whatever it cost her in terms of privacy or peace, Melissa Parker Thompson was going to face consequences for what she'd done.
Rebecca arrived first, carrying a bottle of wine and wearing the expression she usually reserved for parent-teacher conferences with particularly difficult parents. Maya followed 20 minutes later, still in her scrubs, looking concerned and slightly out of breath from rushing over after her shift. "Okay, spill," Rebecca said, settling onto Olivia's couch with the directness that had made her such an effective teacher. "What did that jackass do now?" Olivia had spent the hours since leaving work organizing her discovery into something coherent. She'd taken screenshots of Melissa's posts, cross-referenced them with her own private photos, and created a timeline that showed the systematic theft of her experience. Now she spread it all out on her coffee table like a detective presenting evidence to a jury. "Remember the photos I took during everything with Emma?" Olivia began, her voice steadier than she had expected. "The hospital bracelet, the ultrasound images, the paperwork from the procedures?" Maya nodded slowly. She'd been the one who'd helped Olivia organize those photos into a private album when the grief threatened to overwhelm her. "Of course. You said they helped you remember that Emma was real, that what you went through mattered." "Jake's new wife has been using them. All of them. She's been posting my photos on her social media, claiming she had a miscarriage 3 months ago. She's built an entire fake identity around my loss, and she's making money from it." The silence that followed was profound. Rebecca picked up Olivia's phone, scrolling through the screenshots with increasingly wide eyes. Maya leaned over her shoulder, and Olivia watched their expressions shift from confusion to horror to outrage. "This is..." Rebecca started, then stopped, apparently unable to find words strong enough for what she was seeing. "Sick," Maya finished flatly. "This is absolutely sick. How did she even get these photos? You never posted them anywhere public?" That was the question that had been haunting Olivia all afternoon. "I don't know. Some of them I only ever showed you two. Others were just stored on my phone. But look at this." She pulled up one of Melissa's blog posts. "She doesn't just have the photos, she knows details about my pregnancy with Emma, about the nursery Jake built, about things I said to him during the worst parts of it all." As they worked through the evidence together, the full scope of what Melissa had constructed became clear. She'd created multiple online personas, Instagram accounts, blog websites, even profiles on pregnancy loss support forums where she shared her story with other grieving parents. The stolen photos weren't just posted randomly. They were part of a carefully crafted narrative that had taken months to build. "Look at this," Maya said, pointing to a series of posts on Melissa's Instagram. "She's been building up to this for almost 6 months. First posting about trying to conceive, then pregnancy announcements, then documenting the supposed loss. She's been planning this for a long time." Rebecca had pulled up Melissa's blog on her own phone and was reading with the focused intensity she brought to grading essays. "She's got affiliate links everywhere. She's literally profiting from your trauma, Olivia. And look at this. She's got a GoFundMe for something called the Angel Baby Foundation, supposedly to help other families dealing with loss. The GoFundMe page showed that Melissa had raised over $8,000 from well-meaning donors who believed they were supporting a couple recovering from pregnancy loss. The description was written in first person, with Melissa claiming to have experienced the devastating loss of our daughter at 15 weeks and wanting to turn our pain into purpose by helping other families. Every detail matched Olivia's actual experience with Emma, down to the specific gestational age and the decision to try to help other families afterward. But where Olivia had channeled her grief into legitimate work with Hope Harbor, Melissa had created a fraudulent charity that existed primarily to collect donations. Maya, ever practical, had started researching on her phone while they talked. "Olivia, this isn't just morally disgusting, it's probably illegal. Identity theft, fraud, copyright infringement. You took those photos. They belong to you. She's using them without permission and making money from them." But would anyone actually prosecute something like this? It's not like she stole credit card numbers or hacked into my bank account. She stole your identity, Rebecca said firmly. Maybe not your name or social security number, but she stole your experience, your story, your documentation of one of the most traumatic things you've ever been through. That has to count for something legally. Maya was still scrolling through legal websites. There are definitely laws about using someone else's photos without permission, especially for commercial purposes. And if she's collecting donations under false pretenses, that's fraud. The question is whether you want to go that route.
The conversation shifted as they began to consider what taking action would actually mean for Olivia. Fighting back would require her to go public with details about her loss that she'd kept private for years. It would mean re-engaging with Jake after working so hard to separate their lives. It would mean potentially facing legal battles, court appearances, and public scrutiny of the most painful period of her life. "I've worked so hard to move past all of this," Olivia said, voicing the fear that had been growing in her chest. "What if fighting back just drags me back into that dark place? What if it undoes all the healing I've done?" Rebecca reached across the table and took her hand. "What if not fighting back leaves you feeling powerless for the rest of your life? This woman didn't just steal your photos, Liv. She stole your truth. She took your experience of loss and turned it into her performance. That's not something you can just ignore and hope it goes away." Maya nodded in agreement. "And think about the other people she's fooling. The families on those support forums who are sharing their real experiences with her, thinking she understands their pain. The people donating money, thinking they're helping someone who's actually been through loss. She's not just hurting you, she's manipulating everyone who believes her lies." As they talked deeper into the evening, Olivia realized she had more support than she'd initially thought. Maya mentioned that her hospital had dealt with similar cases of people faking medical conditions for sympathy or financial gain. Rebecca knew lawyers from her husband's firm who specialized in intellectual property and fraud cases. Even Jennifer, Jake's cousin who'd first alerted Olivia to the situation, had offered to provide testimony about the inconsistencies she'd noticed in Melissa's story. "You don't have to do this alone," Maya said, "and you don't have to do it in a way that re-traumatizes you. We can find lawyers who specialize in these kinds of cases, people who understand that this isn't just about stolen photos, it's about someone weaponizing your grief." The more they talked, the more Olivia began to see that taking action didn't have to mean destroying herself in the process. She could pursue justice while protecting her own healing. She could fight back without letting the fight consume her the way the original loss had nearly done. By 10 o'clock, they'd outlined a plan. Olivia would start by consulting with a lawyer who specialized in fraud and intellectual property cases. Maya would help her document all the evidence they'd found, creating a comprehensive file that showed the extent of Melissa's deception. Rebecca would use her connections to find additional legal resources and help Olivia prepare for what might be a lengthy process. But first, there was something Olivia needed to do that felt both terrifying and necessary. She needed to contact the platforms where Melissa was posting the stolen content. Instagram, Facebook, her blog hosting service. All of them had policies against using other people's content without permission. Getting the posts removed wouldn't solve everything, but it would be a start. "I want to message some of the people who've been commenting on her posts too, the ones sharing their own stories of loss, thinking they're connecting with someone who understands their pain. They deserve to know they're being lied to." Maya looked concerned. "That's a good impulse, but maybe run that by a lawyer first. You don't want to do anything that could hurt your case later." As her friends prepared to leave, Olivia felt something she hadn't experienced in years, a sense of righteous purpose that was entirely separate from her grief. This wasn't about relitigating her marriage to Jake or trying to process her loss all over again. This was about standing up to someone who had violated her in a profound way and was continuing to deceive and exploit others. "I'm going to do this," she said aloud, as much to herself as to Maya and Rebecca. "I'm going to fight her. I'm going to make sure she faces consequences for what she's done, and I'm going to make sure everyone knows the truth." Rebecca hugged her tightly at the door. "Good. I'm proud of you for not just rolling over and taking this. That woman picked the wrong person to steal from." After they left, Olivia sat alone in her apartment,
surrounded by the evidence of Melissa's elaborate deception. The photos spread across her coffee table looked strange in the lamplight. Familiar images that had been twisted into something unrecognizable. Sacred moments that had been turned into performance art. Unable to sleep, Olivia spent the next several hours diving deeper into her research. She discovered that Melissa's deception went beyond just a pregnancy loss story. She'd apparently fabricated other medical issues in the past, posting about mysterious illnesses and recovery journeys that seemed designed to garner sympathy and support from her social media followers. There were inconsistencies everywhere once Olivia knew what to look for. Photos that were supposedly taken months apart but showed identical backgrounds and lighting. Medical documents with dates that didn't align with the timeline of posts. Even the comments from Jake seemed scripted, as if he was playing a role rather than genuinely expressing grief. Most disturbing was the discovery that Melissa had been in touch with other pregnancy loss advocates, offering to share her expertise and story at conferences and support group meetings. She'd positioned herself as someone who could help other grieving parents, all based on a tragedy she'd never actually experienced. Olivia began screenshotting everything systematically, creating folders on her computer organized by platform and date. She documented not just the stolen photos, but the entire narrative Melissa had constructed around them. The fake medical documents, the manipulated timelines, the fraudulent charity solicitations, all of it needed to be preserved as evidence. As she worked, Olivia felt a strange sense of reclaiming ownership over her own story. For months, Melissa had controlled the narrative around Emma's loss, twisting it into something false and commercial. Now, Olivia was taking it back, organizing the truth alongside the lies, preparing to set the record straight. The work was emotionally exhausting, but it was also empowering. Every screenshot she took, every inconsistency she documented, every piece of evidence she gathered was a step towards justice. She was no longer the passive victim of someone else's manipulation. She was an advocate for her own truth. By 3 a.m, Olivia had compiled over 200 pages of evidence. Photos, blog posts, social media interactions, donation solicitations, support forum exchanges. A comprehensive documentation of Melissa's elaborate fraud. She saved it all to a secure cloud storage account and made backup copies on external drives. Tomorrow, she would start making phone calls. She would find a lawyer, contact the platforms, begin the process of fighting back for herself and for everyone else who had been deceived. The scared, grieving woman who had lost Emma 3 years ago might not have been strong enough for this fight, but the person Olivia had become, someone who had rebuilt her life from scratch, who had turned her own trauma into meaningful work helping others, she was ready for whatever came next.
3 days after her late-night documentation session, Olivia sat in the downtown Portland office of Sarah Chen, an attorney specializing in intellectual property and fraud cases. Rebecca's husband had made the introduction, describing Sarah as someone who doesn't back down from complicated cases and actually gives a damn about her clients. Sarah's office was nothing like the sterile corporate spaces Olivia had imagined. Books lined the walls, plants filled the corners, and framed photos of what appeared to be successful cases created a visual timeline of justice served. Sarah herself was younger than Olivia had expected, maybe early 30s, with an intensity that reminded Olivia of Maya during a particularly challenging nursing shift. "I've reviewed the materials you sent over," Sarah said, gesturing to a thick folder on her desk. "I have to say, in 15 years of practice, I've never seen identity theft quite like this. The systematic nature of it, the emotional manipulation, the financial fraud, it's honestly breathtaking in its audacity." Olivia felt a mixture of validation and dread. "So, you think we have a case?" "Multiple cases, actually. Copyright infringement for using your photos without permission, fraud for the fake charity solicitations, identity theft for appropriating your medical experiences, potentially even defamation, depending on how we frame the damages to your reputation and emotional well-being." But then came the complications that would define the next several months of Olivia's life. Here's where it gets tricky, Sarah continued, pulling out a legal pad covered in notes. Melissa lives in Oregon, but her blog is hosted through a company in California. Her social media posts have reached people in multiple states. The fake charity is registered in Washington, and some of the photos were originally taken in Oregon but posted from devices in other locations when she travels. Olivia felt her stomach sink. What does that mean? It means we're looking at potential lawsuits in multiple jurisdictions, each with different laws about digital privacy, fraud, and intellectual property. It also means this is going to be expensive and time-consuming in ways that simple cases aren't. Sarah quoted legal fees that made Olivia's savings account look like pocket change. Even if they won, and winning wasn't guaranteed, the process could take years and cost more than Olivia made in an entire year at Hope Harbor. There is one alternative, Sarah said carefully. We could try to resolve this through cease and desist letters first. Maybe get her to take down the content and shut down the fraudulent charity without going to court. It's faster, cheaper, and might accomplish what you're looking for. But it also meant Melissa might never face real consequences for what she'd done. While waiting for Sarah to draft cease and desist letters, Olivia decided to pursue another avenue, reporting the stolen content directly to the platforms where it was being posted. Instagram, Facebook, and Melissa's blog hosting service all had policies against using other people's intellectual property without permission. What should have been a straightforward process turned into a bureaucratic nightmare that consumed weeks of Olivia's life. Instagram's reporting system required her to prove she was the original creator of the content. This meant providing timestamps, metadata, and documentation that the photos were taken with her devices. But some of the photos had been edited or cropped by Melissa, making the metadata comparison more complicated. We need additional verification of your ownership of this content, read the response from Instagram's legal team. Please provide original camera files, documentation of the circumstances under which these photos were taken, and any additional proof that you are the legitimate copyright holder. Olivia found herself in the surreal position of having to prove that she had actually experienced a miscarriage. She had to provide hospital records, medical bills, and detailed documentation of one of the most traumatic periods of her life just to get stolen photos removed from social media. The process was re-traumatizing in ways she hadn't anticipated. Every form she filled out, every piece of medical documentation she provided, forced her to relive details she'd worked years to process and integrate into her healing. 2 weeks into her platform reporting process, Olivia received a message that made her blood run cold. Melissa had apparently discovered that someone was challenging her posts and had decided to go on the offensive. The message came through Instagram direct message. I don't know who you think you are, but trying to get my posts removed is harassment. I've been through enough losing my baby without some stranger trying to silence my grief. If you don't stop, I'm going to report you for cyberbullying. But it got worse. Melissa had apparently rallied her online support network, telling them that someone was quote-unquote attacking a grieving mother by trying to get her posts removed. Olivia began receiving hostile messages from strangers who believed they were defending someone dealing with pregnancy loss. You should be ashamed of yourself, read one message. This woman is trying to heal from losing her child and you're making it worse. What kind of person harasses someone who's already suffering? The irony was devastating. Olivia was being attacked for trying to reclaim her own stolen story of loss by people who thought they were protecting someone else's genuine grief. The stress of fighting Melissa's fraud began affecting every aspect of Olivia's life, including her job at Hope Harbor. The irony of working for an organization dedicated to supporting families through pregnancy and infant loss, while simultaneously battling someone who had stolen and monetized her own loss, wasn't lost on her. Her supervisor, Carol Williams, noticed the change in Olivia's work almost immediately. You seem distracted lately, Carol mentioned during a routine check-in. Is everything okay? You've missed a couple of deadlines, which isn't like you. Olivia found herself in an impossible position. She couldn't explain what was happening without revealing personal details about her past that she'd never shared with her colleagues.
But the legal battle was consuming so much of her mental and emotional energy that she couldn't maintain her usual performance standards. "I'm dealing with some personal legal issues," she told Carol carefully. "It's temporary, but it's taking up a lot of my bandwidth right now." Carol's expression grew concerned. "Is there anything Hope Harbor can do to support you? We have an employee assistance program that includes legal consultation services." The offer was well-intentioned, but Olivia knew that Hope Harbor's legal resources were designed for standard employee issues, workplace conflicts, contract disputes, maybe divorce proceedings. They weren't equipped to handle complex, multi-jurisdictional fraud cases involving stolen medical documentation and fake charities. As the legal process dragged on, Olivia found herself increasingly isolated from her normal support systems. Maya and Rebecca remained steadfast allies, but they had their own lives and responsibilities. The constant updates about legal procedures, platform appeals, and documentation requirements began to feel like all Olivia could talk about. "I feel like I'm becoming the kind of person I used to avoid," she confided to Maya during one of their Thursday coffee meetings. "Someone whose entire identity revolves around drama and conflict. I don't want to be that person." Maya stirred her latte thoughtfully. "You're not creating drama, Liv. You're responding to someone else's fraud. There's a difference." But the distinction felt academic when Olivia's entire life had become consumed by evidence gathering, legal consultations, and platform disputes. She'd started declining social invitations because she was either too exhausted or too preoccupied to be good company. Her apartment, once a peaceful sanctuary, was now filled with legal documents and printed screenshots. Even her work suffered. The creativity and compassion that had made her effective at Hope Harbor were being drained by the constant stress of litigation. She found herself snapping at coworkers, missing deadlines, and struggling to engage with the families they served because her own trauma was so activated. 3 months into the legal battle, Olivia's savings were nearly depleted. Attorney fees, court filing costs, and the expense of obtaining official documentation for her various platform disputes had consumed most of her emergency fund. She'd started picking up freelance graphic design work in the evenings, but the extra hours only added to her stress. Sarah had warned her about the costs, but the reality was more brutal than Olivia had anticipated. "We're at a decision point," Sarah told her during a consultation in September. "We can continue pursuing the full legal case, but you're looking at potentially another $20,000 in fees before we even get to trial. Or we can try to negotiate a settlement that gets the content removed and maybe some financial compensation, but probably not enough to cover your legal costs." Olivia stared at the invoice Sarah had just presented. $8,400 for work completed so far with no guarantee of success. The amount represented nearly 3 months of her salary at Hope Harbor. "What would a settlement look like?" Olivia asked. "Melissa agrees to remove all the stolen content, shut down the fake charity, and maybe pay some financial compensation, but she probably wouldn't admit wrongdoing, and there'd likely be a non-disclosure agreement preventing you from talking about what happened." The idea of letting Melissa escape without real consequences felt like swallowing glass, but Olivia was running out of options. The chronic stress of the legal battle began taking a physical toll that Olivia couldn't ignore. She developed persistent headaches, had trouble sleeping, and found herself constantly on edge. Her doctor prescribed medication for anxiety, something Olivia had never needed before, even during the worst of her grief after losing Emma. "Your blood pressure is elevated," Dr. Martinez told her during a routine checkup. "Are you dealing with unusual stress right now?" Olivia laughed humorlessly. "You could say that." "I'm going to recommend some stress management techniques and possibly refer you to a counselor who specializes in trauma recovery. Whatever you're dealing with, it's clearly affecting your physical health." The irony wasn't lost on Olivia that fighting to recover from someone else's exploitation of her trauma was creating new trauma that required professional intervention. Perhaps most painfully, Olivia discovered that her efforts to expose Melissa's fraud had created divisions within the pregnancy loss community she'd found so supportive.
Some people believed Olivia's evidence and supported her fight for justice, but others, particularly those who had connected with Melissa online, saw Olivia's actions as an attack on someone who was grieving. "I know you believe you're right," wrote one member of a pregnancy loss support forum where Olivia had shared her evidence, "but Melissa has been such a source of comfort to so many of us. Even if some details of her story aren't perfect, does it matter if she's helping people heal?" The response illustrated one of the most frustrating aspects of Melissa's fraud. By positioning herself as a pregnancy loss advocate and support resource, she'd created a community of people who were emotionally invested in believing her story. Exposing her lies didn't just reveal fraud, it shattered the support system she'd built for people who genuinely needed help. By October, 6 months after Jennifer's initial phone call, Olivia found herself questioning everything. She was financially depleted, emotionally exhausted, physically unwell, and professionally struggling. The legal case was stalled in jurisdictional complications, the platform disputes were moving at glacial pace, and Melissa continued posting stolen content while portraying herself as the victim of harassment. Sitting in her apartment one evening, surrounded by legal documents and feeling more alone than she had since the darkest days after losing Emma, Olivia wondered if she'd made a terrible mistake. Maybe she had ignored Jennifer's message. Maybe she had let Melissa profit from her stolen story and focused on protecting her own peace. The woman she'd become over the past 3 years, stable, healed, purposeful, felt like she was slipping away, replaced by someone consumed with anger and legal battles. The life she had carefully rebuilt was crumbling under the weight of seeking justice. But then she looked at her phone and saw a message from a stranger that would change everything. "I saw your posts about Melissa Parker. I think she stole my story too. We need to talk."
The message came from a woman named Amanda Rodriguez in San Diego, and it changed everything Olivia thought she knew about Melissa's operation. Amanda had seen one of Olivia's posts in a pregnancy loss support forum and recognized her own stolen photos being used in Melissa's elaborate fiction. "She took pictures from my Instagram account from 2 years ago," Amanda wrote. "Photos of my son Marcus, who was stillborn at 36 weeks. She's been posting them, claiming they're ultrasound images of her angel baby. I only found out because my sister saw them and recognized Marcus." Olivia's hands shook as she read the message. This wasn't just about her anymore. Melissa had built an entire catalog of stolen experiences from multiple families. Within hours of responding to Amanda, Olivia was on a video call that would reveal the true scope of what they were dealing with. Amanda was a 29-year-old teacher whose son had died just days before his due date. Like Olivia, she had documented her pregnancy journey and loss as a way of processing grief and honoring her child's brief existence. Like Olivia, she had kept most of those photos private, sharing them only with close friends and family. "The worst part," Amanda said, her voice tight with controlled anger, "is that she's using Marcus's photos to raise money. She started a whole fundraising campaign about her late-term loss, using my son's image to make people donate to her fake charity." Working together, Olivia and Amanda began a systematic investigation that uncovered a pattern of theft spanning nearly 2 years. Melissa had apparently targeted pregnancy and infant loss support groups, carefully selecting victims whose stories could be adapted and monetized. They found evidence of at least 6 other families whose experiences had been stolen and repurposed. A couple from Texas, whose twins had died in NICU, had their hospital photos used in Melissa's blog post about the hardest goodbye. A woman from Colorado, whose daughter died from SIDS, had her memorial service photos appropriated for Melissa's posts about celebrating a life cut short. Each victim had been carefully chosen. Melissa targeted people who had limited social media presence, whose photos weren't widely shared, and whose stories had distinctive details that would make for compelling content. She had studied their posts, learned their medical terminology, and appropriated their most intimate moments of grief. She's not just a fraud, Olivia realized during one of their late-night research sessions. She's a predator. She specifically hunts families who are vulnerable and grieving, then profits from their pain. The discovery was both horrifying
and empowering. Olivia was no longer alone in her fight, and the evidence of systematic fraud would be much harder for courts to dismiss than a single case of stolen photos. Amanda's background in technology proved invaluable in ways Olivia hadn't anticipated. As a high school computer science teacher, Amanda understood digital forensics in ways that most people didn't. She suggested using specialized software to analyze the metadata and digital fingerprints of Melissa's stolen content. If we can prove that she's been systematically downloading and editing other people's photos, we can build a much stronger case, she explained. It's not just theft of individual images. It's a pattern of fraudulent behavior that shows intent and planning. Using reverse image search and metadata analysis software, they began mapping the digital trail of Melissa's theft. The results were staggering. Over 200 photos had been stolen from at least 12 different families across the country. Some images had been edited to remove identifying information. Others had been cropped or filtered to make them harder to trace back to their original sources. But the digital evidence revealed something even more disturbing. Melissa had been collecting these photos for months before she even started her fake pregnancy posts. She had built a library of stolen content, organized by type and theme, ready to deploy whenever she needed to support her fabricated narratives. "Look at this," Amanda said, sharing her screen during one of their video calls. She's got folders labeled hospital bracelets, ultrasound images, memorial photos. She's been planning this fraud for a long time. Word of their investigation began spreading through pregnancy loss support networks, and more victims started coming forward. Each new family brought additional evidence of Melissa's systematic theft and provided crucial details about how she operated. They learned that Melissa used multiple fake accounts to infiltrate private grief support groups, where families often shared their most vulnerable moments. She would express sympathy and support, gain trust within the community, and then harvest photos and stories from members who believed they were sharing with someone who understood their pain. Sarah Chen, Olivia's attorney, was amazed by the evidence they were gathering. "This changes everything," she told Olivia during an emergency consultation. "We're not just dealing with intellectual property theft anymore. This is organized fraud on a massive scale. The federal authorities are going to be very interested in this." The case had evolved from a personal dispute to something that could potentially result in federal criminal charges against Melissa. Wire fraud, mail fraud, computer fraud, identity theft across state lines. The list of potential charges kept growing as more evidence emerged.
Amanda suggested they reach out to journalists who specialized in digital fraud stories. "People need to know about this," she argued. "There are probably dozens of other families out there who don't even know their photos have been stolen." Within a week, they had connected with investigative reporter David Park from the Seattle Times, who had previously covered cases of online fraud targeting vulnerable communities. David was immediately interested in the story, particularly the angle about fraudulent charities exploiting donors who thought they were helping grieving families. "This hits all the elements of a compelling investigative piece," David told them during their initial interview. "Systematic fraud, vulnerable victims, fake charities, social media manipulation. The public interest is clear, and the documentation you've gathered is extraordinary." The prospect of media coverage was both exciting and terrifying for Olivia. Going public would mean exposing her own story of loss to scrutiny, but it would also mean that Melissa could no longer hide behind her fabricated victim narrative. As they gathered more evidence, a disturbing psychological profile of Melissa began to emerge. This wasn't opportunistic fraud or a desperate attempt to get sympathy during a difficult time. This was calculated, systematic exploitation that showed clear signs of what experts called factitious disorder by proxy, a condition where someone fabricates illnesses or crises in order to gain attention and sympathy. Dr. Patricia Hamilton, a forensic psychologist who consulted on fraud cases, reviewed the evidence Olivia and Amanda had compiled. "The level of planning and manipulation here is extraordinary," she told them. "This person has spent tremendous time and energy building false identities around other people's tragedies. That suggests a profound psychological disturbance that goes beyond simple financial fraud."
The psychological assessment would be crucial for their legal case, but it also helped Olivia understand that what had happened to her wasn't random bad luck. She had been targeted by someone who specifically sought out families dealing with loss, someone who had made a practice of exploiting grief for personal gain. One of the most significant breakthroughs came when Amanda discovered that Melissa's fake charity wasn't just collecting donations, it was also applying for grants from legitimate foundations that supported families dealing with pregnancy and infant loss. The Angel Baby Foundation had submitted applications to 3 major charitable foundations claiming to be run by parents who have experienced the devastating loss of multiple pregnancies and seeking funding to provide support and resources to other grieving families. The grant applications included fabricated financial statements, fake testimonials from supposed clients, and detailed project proposals for programs that existed only on paper. If successful, these grants could have brought in hundreds of thousands of dollars in funding based entirely on stolen experiences and fabricated credentials. She was essentially competing for funding against legitimate organizations, Olivia realized, organizations like Hope Harbor that actually help families dealing with loss. She was taking resources away from people who really needed them. This discovery added another dimension to their case and attracted the attention of the foundation world, where fraudulent grant applications were taken very seriously. The digital forensics investigation revealed sophisticated techniques that suggested Melissa had help or considerable technical expertise. She had used VPN services to mask her location when downloading stolen photos, employed photo editing software to remove metadata, and created false timestamps to support her fictional timeline. "This isn't amateur hour," explained Marcus Webb, the digital forensics expert Amanda had consulted. "She's using professional-grade tools and techniques to cover her tracks. Either she has significant technical knowledge herself, or she's working with someone who does." The possibility that Melissa was part of a larger operation rather than a lone fraudster opened new avenues for investigation and potentially much more serious criminal charges. For Olivia, the breakthrough moment wasn't just about gathering evidence or building a legal case. It was about understanding that her fight wasn't just personal anymore. It was about protecting an entire community of grieving families from predatory exploitation. "6 months ago, I thought this was about getting my photos back," she told Maya during one of their coffee meetings. "Now, I realize it's about stopping someone who's been systematically victimizing families at their most vulnerable moments. That's bigger than my personal grievance." The shifting perspective transformed Olivia's relationship with the legal battle. Instead of feeling like a victim fighting for personal vindication, she began to see herself as an advocate fighting for community protection. The stress and financial strain were still overwhelming, but they now felt purposeful rather than simply punitive. By December, Olivia and Amanda had connected with 9 other families whose experiences had been stolen by Melissa. Together, they formed an informal coalition that shared resources, coordinated legal strategies, and provided emotional support for each other. The group included parents who had lost children at various stages: early miscarriages, late-term losses, SIDS deaths, and NICU tragedies. What united them wasn't just their shared experience of Melissa's fraud, but their determination to ensure she faced meaningful consequences for what she had done. "We're not just victims anymore," Amanda said during one of their group video calls. "We're witnesses. We're advocates. We're the people who are going to make sure this doesn't happen to other families." Sarah Chen was amazed by the coalition they'd built. "I've never seen anything like this in a fraud case," she told Olivia. "Usually, victims are isolated and struggling alone. You've built a support network that's also an evidence-gathering operation. It's incredibly powerful." The breakthrough that would define everything came in mid-December when the FBI's Internet Crime Complaint Center reached out to Sarah Chen's office. The combination of interstate fraud, fake charity operations, and systematic identity theft had triggered federal interest in the case. "This has moved beyond civil litigation," Sarah explained to Olivia and Amanda on a conference call. "The federal authorities are opening a criminal investigation. They want to interview all of you as witnesses, and they're going to pursue charges independently of our civil case."
The news was thrilling and terrifying. Federal criminal charges carried the possibility of serious prison time for Melissa, but they also meant that the case would become public in ways Olivia had never fully considered. "Are you ready for this to become national news?" Sarah asked. "Because that's probably what's going to happen. This story has all the elements that media outlets love: technology, fraud, vulnerable victims, fake charities, social media manipulation. Once federal charges are filed, it's going to get a lot of attention." Olivia looked at Amanda on the video call, seeing her own mixture of determination and fear reflected back at her. They had started this fight to reclaim their stolen stories. Now they were about to help bring down what federal investigators were calling one of the most sophisticated social media fraud operations we've seen targeting grieving families. The scared, isolated woman who had discovered her photos on Melissa's Instagram 6 months ago was gone. In her place was someone who had built a coalition, gathered evidence that would support federal charges, and transformed personal trauma into community protection.
The FBI field office in Portland was nothing like the sterile government buildings Olivia had imagined from watching crime shows. Agent Rebecca Torres, a specialist in cybercrime and fraud cases, met Olivia and Amanda in a conference room that looked more like a corporate boardroom than an interrogation facility. "I want you to understand that this investigation has expanded beyond what you initially reported," Agent Torres began, spreading files across the table. "We've identified what appears to be a sophisticated fraud network that may involve multiple perpetrators across several states." The revelation that Melissa might not be working alone sent chills through Olivia. They had spent months assuming they were dealing with one disturbed individual, but the federal investigation had uncovered evidence of coordination and planning that suggested a more complex operation. "We've traced financial transactions that show the fraudulent charity donations being funneled through multiple accounts," Agent Torres continued. "Some of the technical expertise required to create and maintain these fake identities suggests either significant technical knowledge or collaboration with others who have those skills." The scope of what they were dealing with was staggering. The FBI had identified over 40 families whose experiences had been stolen and monetized, with total fraudulent donations exceeding $300,000 across multiple fake charities and GoFundMe campaigns. David Park's investigative article for the Seattle Times was scheduled to publish on a Monday morning in January. Olivia spent the weekend in a state of nervous anticipation, knowing that once the story went live, there would be no controlling how it spread or how the public would react. The headline was stark and attention-grabbing. "Stolen Grief: How One Woman Built a Fake Charity Empire on Other Families' Tragedy Photos." The article was comprehensive, featuring interviews with Olivia, Amanda, and 3 other victim families, along with expert commentary from fraud investigators and psychologists. Within hours of publication, the story had been picked up by major news outlets across the country. CNN, ABC News, NBC, and Fox all ran segments about the case. Social media exploded with outrage, sympathy for the victims, and demands for justice. But with the attention came unexpected challenges that tested Olivia's resolve in ways she hadn't anticipated. Melissa's response to the media coverage was swift and strategic. Within 24 hours of the Seattle Times article going viral, she had launched what could only be described as a counter-narrative campaign designed to portray herself as the victim of a coordinated harassment effort. She posted a long, emotional video on Instagram, tears streaming down her face, claiming that jealous, vindictive people were trying to destroy her reputation because they couldn't handle seeing her successfully help other grieving families. She insisted that any similarities between her photos and others were coincidental, that grief looked the same for everyone.
"I've dedicated my life to helping other families who have lost babies," she said in the video. "These attacks are coming from people who want to tear down anyone who's successful in the pregnancy loss advocacy space. They're trying to silence me because my foundation has helped so many people that they can't stand to see it." The video was carefully crafted to appeal to her existing supporter base while positioning the federal investigation as persecution rather than justice. Within hours, it had generated thousands of supportive comments and shares. What followed was a sophisticated online harassment campaign that seemed too organized to be spontaneous. Olivia, Amanda, and the other victim families began receiving hundreds of hostile messages across all their social media platforms. "You're disgusting for attacking a grieving mother. Melissa has helped so many families, and you're trying to destroy her out of jealousy. You should be ashamed of yourselves." The messages weren't just critical. Many contained personal information about the victims that wasn't publicly available. Details about their jobs, their addresses, their family members. Someone was conducting research on the victims and disseminating information to fuel the harassment campaign. "This feels coordinated," Amanda told Olivia during one of their now daily check-in calls. "The timing, the similar language, the fact that they all have personal information about us. Someone's organizing this." Agent Torres confirmed their suspicions when she called them later that week. "We're seeing evidence that suggests the harassment campaign is being directed and funded. IP tracking shows many of the hostile accounts were created recently and are being operated from a small number of locations." The media attention brought unexpected pressure at Olivia's job. Hope Harbor, as a small nonprofit in the pregnancy loss space, suddenly found itself fielding calls from donors and supporters who had seen the news coverage and wanted to know about the organization's connection to Olivia. Some callers were supportive, wanting to donate to Hope Harbor specifically because they admired Olivia's courage in exposing fraud in the pregnancy loss community. But others were hostile, having believed Melissa's version of events and viewing Olivia as someone who was attacking grieving families. Carol Williams, Olivia's supervisor, called her into the office for a conversation that would test everything Olivia had built over the past 3 years. "Olivia, I want you to know that the board and I support you completely. What you've uncovered is horrific, and we're proud that someone from our organization has taken a stand against this kind of exploitation." Olivia felt relief flood through her, but Carol's expression suggested there was more to the conversation. "However, we're also concerned about the impact this is having on our organization. We've received some substantial donations because of your visibility, but we've also lost a few major donors who believe Melissa's version of events. More importantly, some of the families we serve are confused and upset. They're worried that being associated with Hope Harbor might somehow compromise their privacy." The dilemma was heartbreaking. Olivia's fight for justice was creating complications for the organization she loved and the families it served. The very people she was trying to protect, grieving families, were caught in the crossfire of a battle they hadn't asked to be part of.
As the federal investigation intensified, Sarah Chen delivered news that complicated everything Olivia thought she understood about their case. Melissa had hired a high-profile criminal defense attorney, Marcus Webb, who was already filing motions to suppress evidence and challenging the jurisdiction of the federal investigation. Webb is one of the best white-collar criminal defense attorneys in the country, Sarah explained. He's expensive, which raises questions about where Melissa is getting the money to pay him. But more importantly, he's very good at creating a reasonable doubt in complex fraud cases. Webb's strategy was becoming clear. Claim that Melissa was a victim of mistaken identity, that the real fraudster was someone else who had used her accounts, and that any similarities between her posts and the victim's photos were coincidental. He was also arguing that the federal authorities had exceeded their jurisdiction by investigating what he claimed were simple civil disputes between private parties. He's trying to get the criminal charges dismissed by arguing that this is really a copyright dispute that should be handled in civil court, Sarah continued. If he's successful, we'd be back to square one, except now Melissa knows exactly what evidence we have against her.
The media attention and legal pressure began taking a toll on Olivia's personal life in ways that surprised her. Friends and acquaintances who had known about her loss with Jake but never known the details were suddenly seeing intimate aspects of her grief played out in national news coverage. Her parents, who lived in Sacramento and had been supportive but distant during her divorce and recovery, called after seeing her on CNN. The conversation was awkward and painful as they struggled to understand why she had chosen to make such private matters public. "Honey, we're proud of you for standing up for what's right," her mother said carefully, "but are you sure this is worth all the stress and attention? Maybe it would be better to just let the lawyers handle it and try to move on with your life." The suggestion that she should retreat and let others fight the battle felt like a betrayal of everything she'd worked toward. But Olivia also understood that her parents were worried about her well-being and genuinely couldn't comprehend why she would choose to relive trauma in such a public way. Maya and Rebecca remained steadfast supporters, but even their friendship was being tested by the intensity of Olivia's situation. Every conversation now revolved around the case, the investigation, or the media coverage. The lighthearted friendship they'd maintained for years was being overshadowed by legal strategy and crisis management. "I miss just talking about normal stuff with you," Rebecca said gently during one of their coffee meetings. "Movies, drama work, dating horror stories. I feel like we haven't had a conversation in months that didn't involve lawyers or FBI agents." The observation stung because it was accurate. Olivia had become so consumed with the fight that she'd lost touch with the parts of herself that existed outside of it. The woman who had rebuilt her life around healing and helping others was disappearing into someone defined entirely by conflict and vindication. The victim coalition tensions. Even within the coalition of victim families, tensions were beginning to emerge. Some families wanted to pursue maximum criminal penalties and civil damages, while others were more interested in simply getting the stolen content removed and ensuring Melissa couldn't continue her fraud. A family from Colorado whose daughter had died from SIDS decided to drop out of the federal case after receiving particularly vicious harassment. "We can't handle this anymore," the mother, Patricia Chen, told Olivia during a tearful phone call. "My husband is having panic attacks, our son is being bullied at school because of the media coverage, and we just want it to stop." The loss of coalition members weakened both the legal case and the emotional support system that had sustained everyone through the investigation. Each family that stepped away made the remaining victims more vulnerable and more isolated. Agent Torres delivered an ultimatum that would define the rest of the case. The federal prosecutor was willing to pursue criminal charges, but they needed the victim families to commit to testifying in federal court if the case went to trial. "I need to know who's in and who's out," Agent Torres told the remaining coalition members during a conference call. "Federal prosecution is resource intensive, and if we don't have witnesses willing to testify, we can't move forward. The defense attorney is already arguing that this is a manufactured case based on civil disputes rather than criminal fraud." The prospect of testifying in federal court was terrifying for everyone involved. It would mean facing cross-examination by Marcus Webb, having their personal lives scrutinized by defense attorneys, and potentially enduring a trial that could last for months. You need to understand that if we go forward with federal charges, your lives will be under a microscope. Everything about your losses, your grief, your social media presence, your personal relationships, all of it becomes fair game for the defense team. Olivia found herself in her apartment on a February evening, facing the most difficult decision of her life. On the table in front of her were two documents, one from Agent Torres confirming her commitment to testify in federal court, the other from Marcus Webb's office offering a settlement that would end everything quietly. The settlement offer was comprehensive. Melissa would remove all stolen content, shut down the fake charity, pay $50,000 in damages to be split among the victims, and agreed to a restraining order preventing further contact. On one hand, the settlement would end the harassment, the media attention, and the legal expenses that had consumed her life for almost a year. She could return to her job at Hope Harbor, rebuild her relationships, and try to reclaim the peaceful life she'd worked so hard to create. On the other hand, accepting the settlement would mean Melissa faced no meaningful consequences for systematically exploiting grieving families. She would keep most of the money she had stolen, avoid any admission of wrongdoing, and potentially be free to start similar fraud operations in the future. Maya and Rebecca had both supported whatever decision she wanted to make. Amanda was leaning toward accepting the settlement, exhausted by the toll the case had taken on her family. Most of the other victim families had already signed settlement agreements. The FBI couldn't make the decision for her, but Agent Torres had been clear about the implications. If you don't testify, we probably don't have enough evidence to proceed with federal charges. She walks away with this with minimal consequences. Sitting alone in her apartment, surrounded by the legal documents that represented a year of her life, Olivia had to decide who she wanted to be. Someone who accepted quiet resolution for personal peace, or someone who risked everything to ensure a predator faced justice. The woman who had discovered the stolen photos a year earlier might have taken the settlement and tried to rebuild her quiet life. But the person she had become through this fight, someone who had built coalitions, gathered evidence, and stood up for an entire community of vulnerable families, couldn't walk away from the chance to prevent future victims. At 11:47 p.m., on a cold February night, Olivia signed the document committing herself to testify in federal court against Melissa Parker Thompson. There would be no going back, no quiet resolution, no protection from whatever Marcus Webb and his defense team would throw at her. She was all in, and the real battle was just beginning.
The United States District Court for the District of Oregon was packed on the first day of USA versus Melissa Parker Thompson. 18 months after Olivia first discovered her stolen photos, she sat in the witness gallery watching federal prosecutors present a case that had grown far beyond what anyone had initially imagined. Assistant U.S. Attorney Jennifer Walsh, ironically sharing a name with Jake's cousin who had first alerted Olivia to the theft, laid out a prosecution case that was staggering in its scope. Melissa wasn't just a lone fraudster who had stolen some photos for Sympathy. She was the central figure in what investigators now called Operation Stolen Grief, a sophisticated network that had systematically targeted over 200 families across 15 states. The defendant didn't just steal photographs, Walsh told the jury during opening statements. She stole the most intimate, sacred moments of families experiencing unimaginable loss. She turned their deepest pain into her profit, their private grief into her public performance, their genuine tragedy into her fraudulent enterprise. The evidence presented over the first week of trial revealed the full architecture of Melissa's operation. She had employed a team of freelancers to help edit stolen photos, create fake medical documents, and manage multiple social media accounts. She had registered dozens of fake charities, created false tax documents, and even hired actors to appear in videos as grateful families her organizations had supposedly helped. The financial scope was breathtaking. Over $800,000 in fraudulent donations, $200,000 in fraudulent grant funding, and an estimated $150,000 in affiliate marketing revenue from her grief-focused blog and social media platforms. When Olivia took the witness stand on day 8 of the trial, she felt the weight of representing not just herself, but the entire community of families whose experiences had been weaponized for profit. The courtroom was silent as she was sworn in, cameras from major news outlets capturing every moment of what would become one of the most widely watched fraud testimonies in recent legal history. Assistant U.S. Attorney Jennifer Walsh guided Olivia through her story with care and precision. The testimony began with Emma, who she was, how much she was wanted, the dreams Olivia and Jake had built around her arrival. Then came the loss, documented in careful, clinical detail that somehow made it more rather than less devastating.
Can you tell the court why you took photographs during this difficult time? Walsh asked. Emma existed, Olivia said, her voice steady despite the emotional weight of the moment. She was real, she was loved, and she mattered. The photos were proof of that. They were all I had left of my daughter, and they were sacred to me. When Walsh presented the stolen photos as evidence, projected on screens throughout the courtroom, Olivia narrated each one. The hospital bracelet that represented the worst day of her life, now repurposed as a prop in someone else's performance. The ultrasound image that had once filled her with hope, now used to manipulate strangers into donating money to a fake charity. How did it feel to discover that these intimate photos had been stolen and used by the defendant? Walsh asked. Olivia looked directly at Melissa for the first time since entering the courtroom. It felt like being violated all over again. Emma's death broke my heart, but what the defendant did broke something deeper. She took my daughter's existence and turned it into a lie. Marcus Webb's cross-examination was aggressive and brutal, designed to discredit Olivia's motives and paint her as a vindictive ex-wife seeking attention and revenge. She questioned her mental health following the miscarriage, suggested she was seeking financial gain through the lawsuit, and implied that her public campaign against Melissa was motivated by jealousy over Jake's new marriage. Isn't it true, Miss Martinez, that you were jealous of the happiness your ex-husband found with his new wife? Webb asked. No, Olivia replied firmly. I was horrified that someone would steal my daughter's memory to fake their own tragedy. This has nothing to do with Jake and everything to do with justice for Emma. Marcus Webb's cross-examination was aggressive and brutal, designed to discredit Olivia's motives and paint her as a vindictive ex-wife seeking attention and revenge. She questioned her mental health following the miscarriage, suggested she was seeking financial gain through the lawsuit, and implied that her public campaign against Melissa was motivated by jealousy over Jake's new marriage. Isn't it true, Ms. Martinez, that you were jealous of the happiness your ex-husband found with his new wife? Webb asked. No, Olivia replied firmly. I was horrified that someone would steal my daughter's memory to fake their own tragedy. This has nothing to do with Jake and everything to do with justice for Emma. Marcus Webb's cross-examination was aggressive and brutal, designed to discredit Olivia's motives and paint her as a vindictive ex-wife seeking attention and revenge. She questioned her mental health following the miscarriage, suggested she was seeking financial gain through the lawsuit, and implied that her public campaign against Melissa was motivated by jealousy over Jake's new marriage. Isn't it true, Ms. Martinez, that you were jealous of the happiness your ex-husband found with his new wife? Webb asked. No, Olivia replied firmly. I was horrified that someone would steal my daughter's memory to fake their own tragedy. This has nothing to do with Jake and everything to do with justice for Emma. Marcus Webb's cross-examination was aggressive and brutal, designed to discredit Olivia's motives and paint her as a vindictive ex-wife seeking attention and revenge. She questioned her mental health following the miscarriage, suggested she was seeking financial gain through the lawsuit, and implied that her public campaign against Melissa was motivated by jealousy over Jake's new marriage. Isn't it true, Ms. Martinez, that you were jealous of the happiness your ex-husband found with his new wife? Webb asked. No, Olivia replied firmly. I was horrified that someone would steal my daughter's memory to fake their own tragedy. This has nothing to do with Jake and everything to do with justice for Emma. Marcus Webb's cross-examination was aggressive and brutal, designed to discredit Olivia's motives and paint her as a vindictive ex-wife seeking attention and revenge. She questioned her mental health following the miscarriage, suggested she was seeking financial gain through the lawsuit, and implied that her public campaign against Melissa was motivated by jealousy over Jake's new marriage. Isn't it true, Ms. Martinez, that you were jealous of the happiness your ex-husband found with his new wife? Webb asked. No, Olivia replied firmly. I was horrified that someone would steal my daughter's memory to fake their own tragedy. This has nothing to do with Jake and everything to do with justice for Emma. Marcus Webb's cross-examination was aggressive and brutal, designed to discredit Olivia's motives and paint her as a vindictive ex-wife seeking attention and revenge. She questioned her mental health following the miscarriage, suggested she was seeking financial gain through the lawsuit, and implied that her public campaign against Melissa was motivated by jealousy over Jake's new marriage. Isn't it true, Ms. Martinez, that you were jealous of the happiness your ex-husband found with his new wife? Webb asked. No, Olivia replied firmly. I was horrified that someone would steal my daughter's memory to fake their own tragedy. This has nothing to do with Jake and everything to do with justice for Emma. Marcus Webb's cross-examination was aggressive and brutal, designed to discredit Olivia's motives and paint her as a vindictive ex-wife seeking attention and revenge. She questioned her mental health following the miscarriage, suggested she was seeking financial gain through the lawsuit, and implied that her public campaign against Melissa was motivated by jealousy over Jake's new marriage. Isn't it true, Ms. Martinez, that you were jealous of the happiness your ex-husband found with his new wife? Webb asked. No, Olivia replied firmly. I was horrified that someone would steal my daughter's memory to fake their own tragedy. This has nothing to do with Jake and everything to do with justice for Emma. Marcus Webb's cross-examination was aggressive and brutal, designed to discredit Olivia's motives and paint her as a vindictive ex-wife seeking attention and revenge. She questioned her mental health following the miscarriage, suggested she was seeking financial gain through the lawsuit, and implied that her public campaign against Melissa was motivated by jealousy over Jake's new marriage. Isn't it true, Ms. Martinez, that you were jealous of the happiness your ex-husband found with his new wife? Webb asked. No, Olivia replied firmly. I was horrified that someone would steal my daughter's memory to fake their own tragedy. This has nothing to do with Jake and everything to do with justice for Emma. Marcus Webb's cross-examination was aggressive and brutal, designed to discredit Olivia's motives and paint her as a vindictive ex-wife seeking attention and revenge. She questioned her mental health following the miscarriage, suggested she was seeking financial gain through the lawsuit, and implied that her public campaign against Melissa was motivated by jealousy over Jake's new marriage. Isn't it true, Ms. Martinez, that you were jealous of the happiness your ex-husband found with his new wife? Webb asked. No, Olivia replied firmly. I was horrified that someone would...
In the months following the trial, Olivia began the process of reclaiming her life from the legal battle that had consumed it for 2 years. The woman who emerged from the courthouse after Melissa's sentencing was fundamentally different from the one who had first discovered the stolen photos. Maya and Rebecca noticed the change immediately. You're more confident, Maya observed during one of their resumed Thursday coffee meetings. Not just stronger, but more sure of yourself and what matters to you. The confidence was hard-earned. Olivia had faced cross-examination by one of the country's best defense attorneys, withstood a coordinated harassment campaign, risked her career and personal relationships, and emerged victorious. The experience had shown her that she was capable of much more than she had ever believed. Her relationship with her parents had deepened as well. The trial had forced conversations about grief, resilience, and family support that had been avoided for years. Her mother had flown to Portland for the verdict and had been in the courtroom when Melissa was sentenced. I didn't understand why you were putting yourself through all of this, her mother told her afterward. But watching you in court, seeing how you stood up, not just for yourself, but for all those other families, I've never been more proud of you. Olivia's new role at Hope Harbor evolved into something much larger than anyone had initially envisioned. Working with legal experts, technology specialists, and other nonprofits, she helped develop the first comprehensive guidelines for protecting bereaved families from digital exploitation. The Emma Protocol, named in honor of Olivia's daughter, became the standard for pregnancy and infant loss support organizations across the country. It included privacy protections for support group members, verification procedures for online advocates, and a rapid response protocols for families who discovered their experiences had been stolen. Within 6 months, Olivia was consulting for national organizations, speaking at medical conferences, and helping law enforcement agencies understand the psychological and legal complexity of grief-based fraud cases. What started as your personal fight for justice has become a movement that's protecting families across the country, David Park, the journalist who had first covered her story, told her during a follow-up interview. That's an extraordinary legacy to build from such a terrible violation. Perhaps surprisingly, Olivia reconnected with Jake during the aftermath of the trial. Not romantically, they were both in different places and had built separate lives, but as two people who had shared the loss of Emma and needed to process the trauma of having that experience exploited. "I'm sorry I couldn't support you the way you needed when we lost Emma," Jake told her, during a difficult but healing conversation. "And I'm sorry I couldn't see what Melissa was doing. I should have protected Emma's memory better." The conversation didn't erase the pain of their marriage ending or the years of silence about their daughter, but it provided closure that Olivia hadn't realized she needed. Jake had divorced Melissa during the federal investigation, finally understanding the extent of her deception and manipulation. Amanda Rodriguez, the teacher from San Diego who had been Olivia's first co-victim, became one of her closest friends. Together, they had created a nonprofit organization called the Digital Grief Protection Foundation, dedicated to helping families navigate privacy and safety issues during times of loss. "We turned the worst violation of our lives into protection for other families," Amanda said during the foundation's first anniversary celebration. "That's not healing, that's transformation." 2.5 years after discovering Melissa's fraud, Olivia bought her first house, a small craftsman bungalow in the Hawthorne district with a garden where she could grow vegetables and flowers. The house had a spare bedroom that she turned into a home office, where she worked on advocacy projects and wrote articles about digital safety for bereaved families. She had started dating again, though slowly and with the hard-earned wisdom of someone who understood both her own worth and her capacity for resilience. The relationship with David Chen, a social worker she had met through her advocacy work, was built on mutual respect, shared values, and honest communication about past trauma. "I'm not the same person who was married to Jake. I'm not even the same person who discovered those stolen photos. I'm someone who fought for justice and won. Someone who turned personal pain into community protection. That's who I am now." On the 3rd anniversary of discovering Melissa's fraud, Olivia visited Emma's grave for the first time in 2 years. The legal battle had made it difficult to separate her daughter's memory from the fight for justice, but now she could visit without the weight of unfinished business. "I kept my promise," she told the small headstone that marked where Emma's ashes were buried. "I made sure your story mattered. I made sure no one could steal your memory again." The Digital Grief Protection Foundation had prevented dozens of similar fraud cases, helped law enforcement agencies understand grief-based exploitation, and provided resources to thousands of families navigating loss in the digital age. It wasn't the legacy Olivia had imagined when Emma was alive, but it was meaningful work that honored both her daughter's memory and the strength Olivia had discovered within herself. As Olivia looked towards the future, she saw a life defined not by what had been taken from her, but by what she had chosen to build in response. The scared young woman who had lost a baby and then lost a marriage had become someone who protected entire communities from predatory exploitation. The work continued to evolve. New technologies created new vulnerabilities for grieving families. Social media platforms developed new features that could be manipulated by fraudsters. Each challenge required adaptation and innovation, but Olivia approached them with confidence earned through surviving the worst someone could do to her and emerging victorious. "People ask me if I'm glad this happened," she told a conference of grief counselors and support group leaders. "That's the wrong question. I'm not glad Emma died. I'm not glad someone stole her memory. But I'm proud of who I became in response to those tragedies. I'm proud of the work we've built and the families we've protected." The transformation was complete.
The woman who had once hidden her grief in private photos had become someone who publicly fought for the rights of bereaved families everywhere. The victim had become the protector. The stolen story had become the foundation for justice. Emma's brief life had mattered more than Olivia could have ever imagined when she first held that tiny hospital gown 3 years earlier. Her daughter's legacy lived on, not just in stolen photos turned into evidence, but in every family protected by the systems Olivia had built, every fraud prevented by the protocol she had developed, every victim empowered by the precedent she had established. The fight for Emma's memory had ended with Melissa's conviction, but the mission to protect other families, that would continue for the rest of Olivia's life, and it would ensure that no parent would ever have to face alone what Olivia had survived and overcome.
Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.